In today's lesson, we will continue our study of Christology. In the last lesson, we focused primarily on the nature of Jesus. Today we shift our focus to the actual works of Jesus, past, present, and future. We will begin with Jesus' earthly life and ministry, and we'll start at the very beginning, the virgin birth. Have you ever wondered what the significance of the virgin birth was? God could have chosen any number of miraculous ways to take on human nature. Why a virgin birth? The birth itself is recorded in the Gospels, but its roots go back hundreds of years earlier, to the time of the prophet Isaiah. He predicted the virgin birth in Isaiah 7:14. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. This passage gives us some important insights to why God chose a virgin birth as his means of entry into the world, and we'll spend a few minutes considering it in detail. The context of the prophecy is key. If we look at 7:1 and 2, we see that the house of David, which ruled over the kingdom of Judah, had fallen under threat. These were the days of Israel's divided kingdom. The once united nation of David and Solomon had divided into two opposing kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The northern kingdom of Israel had joined forces with the mighty nation of Syria in an attempt to overthrow Jerusalem. As terror spread, Isaiah was sent to meet Judah's king Ahaz. God promised through Isaiah that the alliance would fail and that he would protect the nation of Judah. In verse 8, Isaiah predicts that the northern kingdom of Israel would cease to exist as a nation within 65 years. As confirmation of this promise of salvation, God encouraged Ahaz to ask for a sign. Ahaz was offered a truly miraculous event to prove that God's promise was accurate. Make it as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Ahaz, however, refused to ask for a sign. Though he gave a pretense of piety, in reality he simply refused to believe God's promise of deliverance. According to 1 Kings 16:7, he instead attempted to ally with Assyria to help him defeat Israel without God's help. Upon his disbelief, Isaiah ceased addressing Ahaz directly and broadened his focus to the entire house of David. In other words, the royal line that began with David and through which God had promised the Messiah. Notably, this promise was in danger, since verse 6 reveals that the foreign kings sought to replace Ahaz, the son of David, with the son of Tabeel. Because Ahaz would not choose, the Lord himself acted and promised a sign for the entire house of David. The purpose of this sign was to prove his loyalty to the house of David. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Isaiah looks ahead to the miraculous birth of Jesus the Messiah, as confirmed by the repetition of this prophecy in Matthew 1:23. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. The birth of Jesus, the son of David, was indeed the ultimate sign of the Lord's protection upon the house of David. When people saw the virgin birth, hundreds of years later, they were to be reminded that God had not forgotten his promise. This promise is clearly fulfilled in the New Testament. Matthew 1:18 makes it very clear that Mary became pregnant before having sexual relations with Joseph. So again, why was the virgin birth important? First, it was a clear miracle, nothing that could be attributed to humanity alone. True to Isaiah's intentions, it was a clear sign from God as high as heaven and as deep as Sheol. Second, it provided a reminder that God had not forgotten his promise to David. Since Isaiah 7 clearly links the virgin birth to the Davidic covenant, we know that Jesus is indeed the long-promised Messiah. Finally, it symbolized God's presence among his people. Isaiah had promised that the child born of a virgin would be Emmanuel, which means God with us. By coming through the Virgin, God was restoring the fellowship with his people that was lost long ago. After the account of Jesus' birth, the Gospels generally fast forward past most of Jesus' life until the beginning of his ministry. We'll consider Jesus' teaching ministry first. When you think of Jesus' teaching, what comes to mind? He certainly said a lot of good things. The Sermon on the Mount, the parables, the Golden Rule, all of these things stand out. But what do all of these things have in common? The central theme of Jesus' earthly teaching was the kingdom of God. This is the single idea that links everything that Jesus taught. On 2 separate occasions, the book of Matthew summarizes Jesus' teaching like this: "And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom." What does this mean? Well, we have already established that Jesus came as the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. In other words, he was the long-awaited Son of David, coming to establish God's perfect reign on earth. This is what the kingdom of God is all about. Jesus came as the king and spent his life proclaiming the gospel of his kingdom. The word gospel literally means good news. So Jesus was spreading the good news that the kingdom of God was approaching. This emphasis is evident in the way the book of Matthew organizes Jesus' teaching. Matthew presents 5 major sermons of Jesus, each of which focuses on a different aspect of the kingdom. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus discusses the nature of life in the kingdom. How should kingdom people live? Then in Matthew 10, Jesus sends his disciples out to make the proclamation of the kingdom. They travel throughout Israel announcing its coming. This proclamation is largely rejected by the Israelites who refused to believe. In Matthew 13, Jesus gives the parables of the kingdom. In these parables, Jesus reveals that the Jews' rejection of the kingdom is no surprise to God. Rather, he has always intended the kingdom to start out small and hidden, growing like a mustard seed. In Matthew 18, Jesus talks about the citizens of the kingdom, giving specific guidelines for fellowship and cooperation between believers. Finally, in Matthew 23 to 25, Jesus predicts the kingdom's future advent, the moment when he will return in glory to finally take the throne. The second major aspect to Jesus' ministry on earth were his miracles. Jesus' miracles fall into 3 major categories, which are summarized nicely in 3 separate stories in Matthew chapter 8. First, Jesus' miracles demonstrate his authority over disease. Jesus healed people everywhere he went. People flocked to him to be healed. Second, Jesus demonstrated his authority over nature. He could calm storms, turn water into wine, and so forth. Finally, Jesus' miracles demonstrated his authority over demons. Even the spiritual realm had to obey him. So what is the common theme throughout all of these? It is that of authority. Jesus' miracles demonstrate that he is in charge. If we consider this fact alongside Jesus' emphasis on the kingdom of God in his teaching, we see why his miracles were important. They demonstrate that Jesus is indeed who he says he is. He is the King, the Messiah. In the person of Jesus, God's kingdom has finally arrived.